pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. First item on the agenda is public comment. Does anybody wish to make a public comment? Anybody wish to make a public comment? If not, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes from the July 26th meeting. What are your wishes? Is that a motion to approve by Supervisor Leahy, seconded by Supervisor Lem? Any discussion? If not, all is in favor of approval of the minutes will signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. All right, review and approval of the 2023 budget assumptions. Christy.
I think we were going to move McGrath up, if that's okay.
All right, we will move, oh, that's right. We will move McGrath. We'll go down to item 7A, class compensation study update and presentation. Molly, I'll turn it over to you for introductions.
Sure. Is Milena on the line? I can't see participants. Okay, so I'm going to hand this over to Milena. Is Victoria also on the line? All right, both.
Victoria is on the line, but I think she is having some audio difficulties. She cannot hear us.
Okay, well, hopefully she can work through that. Milena, are you set to go?
I am absolutely set to go.
Fantastic. Well, then I will hand it over to Milena from McGrath Human Resource Consulting.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If you would just bear with me for a moment, I'm going to do a screen share and I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint presentation that we're going to cover with you this afternoon. Dr. McGrath is located in Tennessee, and she did share with me that they are experiencing some weather. And so it is very possible that that is why she may not necessarily be able to hear us. And if she bebops in and out, we'll have it covered. Can everyone see? Is everyone able to see the PowerPoint presentation at this point?
We do have it up here as part of the packet.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, I did hear a little bit of echoing about that. All right. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be in front of us this afternoon. Again, my name is Milena Halverson-Mays with McGrath Human Resources Group, and with me this afternoon is Victoria McGrath. Victoria is the CEO of the company, and just simply because you have not talked with us yet before, let me tell you a little bit about McGrath, and then we're going to get into your compensation study. McGrath was established back in the year 2000, and so for the past 22 years, the firm has been supporting public sector organizations all across the United States in the form of compensation and benefits.
Enter your access code or meeting number followed by pound.
Sorry about that, in the form of compensation and benefits. And then we also do some public safety consulting.
Enter your attendee ID number.
I apologize if I'm the only one that hears that. I have personally been with McGrath for the past 8 years. I have background in county human resources here in Wisconsin. I worked in human resources for about 15 years before I decided that I wanted to go do something else. And I have been with McGrath working on compensation benefits ever since that time. I'm actually just a little bit west of you in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin.
Could we ask that people please mute? Okay.
Excellent. All right. So we're going to talk this afternoon about how we have been progressing with your respective compensation project. And for those of you that are hoping that you're going to see recommendations today, we're not quite ready to share that information with you. That will be coming at the next meeting, but we're really very, very close to being able to do that. Today's meeting really is to give you an overview of the project, what we have completed to date, and what we're going to be doing here for the next month or so, because for the next 4 to 6 weeks, things are going to get really, really busy for us before we're able to get back and see you again. To craft this particular project, let me just share with you through the RFP process, this was the scope of what the county desired for this project to be. And that is for the organization, for the county to be able to attract a qualified workforce and ensure that the county is in a competitive position within your region and with other private organizations that you might be competitive with. Ensuring internal comparability within the organization so that we have like positions that are being compensated in a similar fashion. Ensuring that that entire program is legally compliant. And then the last thing is to take a look at your policies and your practices. And this is not something that we're going to touch upon today, but when you do see our final recommendations coming forward, we will have policy recommendations for the county to be considering going forward, simply because we are going to be recommending updating this major policy, your compensation program, and the tools that come with it. So what have we done to date? We have met with your county administration, your employee resources department, and then all of your department heads, and they have also brought in a certain level of management so that we could understand all of the department's programs and operations, because not every one department is the same when you look at all of the counties across the state. That's also allowed us to get an understanding of what types of challenges the organization is facing with recruitment and retention. Are you having any problems filling or retaining certain positions, so that we can make sure that we've got them on the watch list? Although we're looking at all positions, we certainly want to know where the organization is experiencing some challenges. In the same meeting, we also talked with the departments about getting additional position information on each of your positions. And now the county has a very unique classification structure, or a job titling structure, where you have some very, what I would call, generic titles. And within that, you might have significantly varying responsibilities. So when we talked with each of the departments, we said we want to make sure that we have a full understanding of everything that's happening within that classification. And as a result, then we asked for a significant number of documents called a position questionnaire, so that we can do a further analysis on each of those responsibilities and determine if they are properly classified or if there indeed need to be some changes. I think the county can expect that when they see the recommendations, that the classification or the job description or the job title structure is likely going to be changing to be a little bit more conforming with what we will see in other county governments. While the county was working on that, we have gone out to the market. We've collected external market data from both public organizations and private organizations. And I'm going to flip the screen here and introduce to you those comparable organizations in the public at this point that have been asked to participate in this particular process. Now, when you look at this list, you are going to see it's a very large list, and you are a large organization, so that makes sense. When you look at the details of it, however, you might say, well, the town of Rib Mountain may not necessarily be comparable to Marathon County, just simply given the size and the enormity of our operations. And for that, I would agree with that. When we met with each of your department directors, we asked them some very fundamental questions about who are you competing with? Who do you lose your human capital to? Where are you trying to draw your human capital from? And then we asked the question, who are you like in terms of operations, programs, and services? Because chances are the contiguous counties around Marathon County do not necessarily have the same level of operation. And so we might be looking at other parts of the state to get an understanding of other operations that might be more aligned with the operations that are performed in Marathon County. And so this list was intended to make sure that we have an understanding of what's happening around you, because there's a lot happening around you, along with what is happening within those counties that might be better aligned in terms of operations. And so that's why that list is pretty comprehensive. The other thing I want to just point out on this list, because it's going to become a little bit more important in a few slides, is there are about 9 organizations that have an asterisk by them. And those organizations are actively in a market update or a compensation study themselves, or that we understand that they're going to be embarking upon one later this fall, probably no later than the end of the year. This is important because this is an indication that the market is really changing very, very quickly. And so even the work that we've done up to this point, we know is going to, I don't want to say it's going to be a little bit behind, but it's always fluid and changing. And because of the known compensation updates, we can expect that your market that we're comparing you against is going to be fluctuating and increasing in the foreseeable future. Victoria, are you able to hear me? Nope, Victoria, we can't hear you. Sorry. Okay. All right. So one of the, I'm hearing a little bit of background at this point. I apologize. One of the items that we wanted to make sure that everyone understands is that when we do collect this market data, and if there is a concern that we've got organizations that might be pulling your market average down, or maybe pushing your market average up. When we do our statistical analysis, we are always keeping that in mind, and we are looking for outliers. If there are organizations that simply are just statistically too low from the county, they're not going to be considered. And then we do have to pay special attention to some of those organizations that might be higher paid, and we don't necessarily want to inflate that market, but we do need to understand where some of those higher paid organizations are in relationship to Marathon County, so that when we come back with a recommendation on those salary ranges, we've considered some of those outliers to the organization. Okay, I'm going to just keep moving. The next couple of slides are going to be some charts and graphs for you that identify for you where Marathon County is in terms of the market. And when we show this to you, we give it to you in what's called a comp ratio form. A comp ratio is a comparison of Marathon County's salary against the average market that we calculated from all of those comparable organizations. Now, when you see the numbers, what we want you to see, or what we like to see, is that numbers that have a 50% comp ratio or higher. Right now, the market is such that if your comp ratios have less than 45%, you're likely experiencing some troubles because they're not market competitive. So we want those numbers to be crowding a 50% number. And I think that will make a little bit more sense when I show you the first chart. Sorry, I'm hearing a little bit of background from somebody as well. All right. First chart here is when we reviewed your minimums or your hiring rates against all of those other organizations. And when you see red is bad, the blue is good. So what this tells us is that 81% of your hiring rates at this point are too far under market competitiveness to be competitive at this point. You have 18% of your positions that have a comp ratio of 45% or greater, but I want to point out, and I don't know if you can see my cursor, there's 11% of these positions that have a comp ratio of 45 to 49%. Technically, they're okay. However, they're under the average market. And so these become positions that are going on our watch list. In essence, what that means is that you really only have 7% of your positions that have a minimum rate that really truly is average competitive to the external market. And it's not surprising when the county is saying they're hiring above the minimum at this point, simply because it's out of necessity. The county has not been able to or has not adjusted their rates in the past 10 years. And so it's not surprising to see such a significant difference between your rates of pay and what the external market is showing us. But the minimums is only one piece of this. We look at multiple different parts of the salary ranges. And so let me share with you when we compared your midpoint or your true midpoint against those other midpoints and those other organizations. And what we found was a little bit better, where you have 68% of your positions are below the average market. 33% have a comp ratio of 45% or greater, but keep in mind, again, that you do have a nice selection of positions that are between that 45 and 49% that we're going to be watching. So really, in essence, even though 33% are going to hit the blue category, only 18% of them actually have a comp ratio of 50% or greater. The last thing that I want to share with you then is, all right, that's what the salary ranges tell us. And a good indication that your ranges have fallen significantly behind in the market. They're going to need a sizable adjustment. So no one should be terribly shocked when they see, there are some real significant changes in those ranges. But then what we have to take a look at is, where are your current employees within that salary range? Because even though the ranges themselves might be falling behind, perhaps your employees are not. And so that's what we call our incumbent analysis, where we're looking at what the employees are being paid against other actual employees' wages within the external market. What we found is that it's about 50-50 down the middle. You've got about 52% of the positions that are below market average. And then you've got about, and I apologize, we always kind of have a rounding issue. This doesn't add up to 100%. You've got about 49% of the positions that are above or at a market competitive rate, although 31% of them are at 50% or greater. And there are maybe a number of reasons why that might be happening. And first and foremost is the tenure of the organization and the pace in which an employee is able to progress through that range based upon their performance. So when we looked at your demographics, there's a couple key things that are important to identify for you. The first thing is that 1/3 of your workforce has been with the county for less than 4 years. That tells me that you've had a significant amount of turnover, and you have employees that have been in the ranges, but not necessarily for a long period of time. That may not bode well for you long term, because those individuals are the ones that are going to get trained, and then they're going to leave, and you're going to become a training ground if you're not already. And that turnover has a true cost, financial and cultural cost, to the organization that we're going to be looking to see if we can help slow down. In addition to that, when we look at where your people are at in terms of current position, because we know that within an organization, someone might promote to a higher position, 45% of your current workforce is in the current position that they are in right now, less than 4 years. So you have a new workforce that you're working with. And then we looked at your retention, and I don't have the graph to show you today. It will be in the final report, but it's really quite startling to see how you're starting out and then you're losing individuals after a handful of years, meaning they're not staying very long. The average tenure within public sector government right now is about 6.5 years. And I think that I don't recall off the top of my head where Marathon County is with that, but we'll provide that information to you in our final report. So in total, what we're finding is that your salary ranges are significantly behind in the external market. And knowing that you have a lot that's happening within your comparable group, they're going to be doing their own market updates, and some of them have recently completed their market updates. Even though we may technically, by definition, be entering into a recession, we're not necessarily seeing that the wages are going to slow down anytime soon. And Marathon County is in a position where you're going to need to make some adjustments to those salary ranges for the retention of your current personnel, along with recruitment of your future personnel as well. So when we look to build or construct your new salary schedule, there are a couple of items that, and this is kind of where rubber hits the road. I'm sharing with you where the summary of findings are, but what's going to be happening next. And Victoria, are you able to talk yet? Nope, Victoria's not able to talk yet. So,
yes, I can. Sorry, I was on a mute.
Excellent. Everybody, this is Victoria.
I apologize for that. We have a huge thunderstorm going on here, and so as a result of that, internet was not as stable as it should be. So,
Victoria, do you want to talk about compensation philosophy?
Sure. Compensation philosophy is basically where do you want to situate yourself within the market? And the question is going to be, what is it going to take for you to attract and retain qualified staff? And looking at, documents that the county has provided when it talks about your county mission statement, your strategic plan, obviously one of the things you really want to do, at least we see here, is provide a prosperous county in Wisconsin, and creating those services that your constituents and members that come into Marathon County are going to be proud of. In order to do that, you need to obviously be able to attract and retain very qualified individuals. And the keywords here are attract as well as retain. Your turnover is a little bit of a concern, and as Melina has mentioned, with turnover there comes a cost, and sometimes it can be a disruption or delay of those types of services that you want to be proud of. So what we're really recommending, and we really think to do, is we need to provide you a salary schedule that's going to be a compensation philosophy of slightly above average. Not sure what that means yet, but because we need to look at where some of these counties are coming in that are doing comp plans. But I think if we go higher than average, 5-6% above average, I think we're going to put you in a very nice position to be competitive, not only now, but in the future. And as Melina said, it's going to be interesting to see, because we are technically going into, quote, a recession. And typically with a recession, you see higher unemployment. Considering the skills gap we have and the lack of employees that we have, I'm not sure we're going to see that as part of this recession. And therefore, I don't think salaries are going to stabilize for a little while. Everybody is still looking for people, and more importantly, looking for people who are going to stay and show up. And so until we can kind of resolve that need, I think you're going to need to be higher than average in order to be competitive. Melina?
Excellent. And to piggyback on that, there is a real documented gap in applications at the public level, at the public sector level. NeoGov is one of a company. They do applicant tracking all across the United States, and they're monitoring this number on an annual basis. Their 2021 number, and it has been very consistent for the last handful of years, is that the number of applicants is reducing by about 21%, which means you simply have less applicants applying. There are a number of reasons for that, and you've got a large private sector comparable or factor here that we haven't even really talked about yet today, because our numbers really are focusing on how you're comparing against the public sector, but we can't ignore what's happening within the private industry as well. And so as a result of that, then you have individuals who are looking at their skill set and saying, all right, well, where all can I go? And it's almost as if they're saying they're not considering public sector. They're going going right into the private sector. And us that work in government, we need to do a better job of trying to market ourselves and, get ourselves back up at the table. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that we are establishing our compensation in such a manner that we will be able to retain those individuals long term and they don't become the job hoppers, which is what's been happening the last couple of years, where individuals can go get trained and then they can go get a job offer elsewhere, knowing that if they hop over to somebody else's compensation system, they're going to earn more than if they were to stay with the current organization. And we don't want that for Marathon County. Looking at your mission statement, looking at your strategic plan, you have great expectations for your county and for those services. And so we want to make sure that that compensation structure is going to align with that expectation. So what's going to happen now for the next few weeks is we are working on rebuilding your compensation system. We will be building that on an above average market base. And when we are ready to share those recommendations with the county at the same time, we're going to have an actual cost. We have talked about estimated costs, and I'm suspecting that that's going to be discussed once we are done with our presentation and you're starting to work on the budget items, but we'll get a more accurate cost when we get all of those recommendations put together. After I've had a chance to meet with your administration to go through those recommendations, then what we're going to do is meet with each of the department directors, and we're going to give them an opportunity to see our recommendations so they can provide some objective feedback to us. And that will allow us to consider if there's anything else that maybe they did not share with us. The position questionnaire may not have gleaned information, or perhaps there might be some changes in the positions just simply in the amount of time that we've been starting this project, so that we can capture all of that information before we put it into final form. And then lastly, when we're all done, then we will be back in front of either this committee and or possibly the entire county board. Molly and I have started to talk about that, but I'm not sure how that is all going to go yet. So it's very likely that you're going to see us at least once, if not 2 more times in this process. So at this point, and I apologize for really going quickly through the slides because there's a lot to take in, but this is a very, very important topic for the county. Do you have any questions that we can answer at this point?
So are there any questions? Chair Gibbs and then Gail.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess the one question, because the benefit package is not significantly different between municipalities, but is sometimes significantly different between the private sector. How is that brought into the equation when we build the new compensation system?
When we look at compensation, one of the things we are looking at is base compensation to base compensation. So when we're building a schedule, we're really concentrating on what people are paying for this type of position versus what you're going to pay for this type of position. Unfortunately, when it comes to benefits, you are absolutely correct. Most of the benefits around municipalities are pretty close to being the same. You might be ranked second or third versus somebody else who's ranked 1 or 2, but that really isn't that different. The issue we have, though, is with private sector, we obviously aren't able to get a lot of that data when it comes to benefits. We can hear what people have said about it, but we really can't get that information. We will be doing some private sector looking at what compensation is for those. We're not going to add it to our averages, but at least know that, if I'm a CDL driver and I'm making $15 here with Marathon, I can go down the street and CDL drivers are being offered $25. So I wish I could say that private sector benefits were taken into account more, but we just simply don't have good enough data in order to do that. Plus, the other issue that we have is the private sector is really able to adjust compensation and benefits much quicker than government is. It's not unusual to see a number of private sector organizations going back to 100% paid health insurance at this point in time, because in some respects, it's like giving folks a pay increase. You know, if you're taking away how much they had to contribute towards that cost, you're giving them a pay increase, and it's easier to put that 100% back to an employee contribution portion at a later date than actually giving somebody a pay decrease. So unless government can shift quicker on its other types of benefits, we really don't take, I mean, we're mindful of it, but it's not going to impact how we construct the salary schedule.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did notice on the comparable organizations that many of them are in large metro areas that have a much higher cost of living. So is there a risk of, I'm looking at Rochester, Minnesota, Dane County, Waukesha County, Washington County, it costs a lot more to live there than it does here. Is that going to impact our results?
No, and the reason I say that is, first of all, we conduct a statistical analysis around the average. And so any of those organizations that might be statistically too high or too low are eliminated so that we are looking at a true average. So it doesn't impact your results. What it does provide us, however, is what are those folks paying? And obviously, some of those you're not going to be able to compete with that. You know, we have so many studies right now. We've now called it the Dane effect because of what Dane County does to salary schedules, as well as the amount of government jobs that are available in Dane County. So we need to be cognizant of what Dane County is paying, and can we get closer to that, or but we're not going to let it skew the averages for the use of your data. As I always say, and I'm not insinuating you folks in any way, shape, or the imagination, but you know, elected officials want us to include all the lower level paid folks in, and employees want us to put all the high level paid in. And we don't make either one of you happy. We're going to make sure that those are readed up. So we're looking at a true average and then trending it up appropriately. But knowing what they're paying is obviously going to be something that we need to bring to your attention.
Are there any other questions? Ann?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know this is titled a compensation study, but is this also going to look at things that might attract and retain employment or employees based on, say, work conditions or their schedule? So moving to a 410 instead of a 5/8, or looking at the peak hours and changing when staffing can happen, just to be flexible for people who might have different work requirements just for the hours. And
We'll direct that to Molly.
Yeah, so this study, no, they are specifically looking at our pay structure, classification, compensation. However, as an organization, that is something that we are looking at and talking about and thinking about on a very regular basis. And we'll certainly make recommendations to all of you as we come up with suggestions that we think are going to be meaningful to help retain staff.
So in terms of time frame, you've indicated that some deliverables will be later this month and others in September. When will we have a more complete package for the budgeting for this committee to review and ultimately for the administrator to build in to it? So you're going to meet with the administration and the department heads, and so when will we see a final report with dollars?
So what will happen when we provide the draft report, all of the employees will be costed.
Placed.
Yeah, they'll be placed, and that will tell us then how much the cost is going to be per every employee. We have to get, and then that will be made available. Our goal is the end of August when we meet with administration. we need to get through that review process with the department directors, however, because sometimes those meetings might result in a pay grade adjustment on a position, and that might then have an impact to the cost. With that said, normally those types of changes are usually pretty minimal. So when we have that initial costing, when we sit down with administration, and again, our goal is the end of the month, that should be a pretty firm number. And when so any kinds of adjustments are going to be plus or minus, usually I would say, $20,000. It's usually a very, very modest adjustment that we might be experiencing because of some of the changes that are made.
So in terms of presentation to both this committee and ultimately the county board, what's our expected timeline for that? So are we looking at our first meeting in September? And Molly, I'm looking at you. And then ultimately we'll need to take this to the county board for their review and in presentation.
If I'm remembering correctly, Melina, you and I, what we had discussed would be that we would have something prepared for that September 7th date. Okay. Is that the first? Am I right on that date with the meeting? Yeah.
No, actually, I indicated no. September 7th is we're going to still be meeting with departments at that point. So what we were talking about was the second meeting in September is likely a more realistic. Yeah, more realistic date for us, because I would be remiss to start talking about recommendations at the committee level until we have all of the feedback from the departments.
Okay, thank you.
Plus, we don't want, that schedule would then be made public. And what you don't want to have is employees to see a schedule knowing that we still might have some of those adjustments to make.
So if you go later I'm just thinking out loud and more for the committee's edification, we're scheduled to meet the 7th, which is the first Wednesday in September. And because the 1st of September falls on a Thursday, it kind of triggers a different schedule. If we were to meet on the 14th, would that give, I'm looking at how we present this to the county board in terms of how much time will we be able to get some feedback from the county board, with the thought of taking it to, we could move our 7th meeting to the 14th or have a separate meeting on the 14th on this study. And then we would then be able to take it to the county board later in September. The problem with taking the presentation to the county board in October is that it will also be at our budget hearing stage, and to get feedback that late in the process could be, if there's major objection to it, we need to hear about that earlier. So I'm thinking out loud, and I welcome your thoughts in terms of the timing. And Lance, please feel free to weigh in as well. Ann?
I have a date that might be wrong, but that we are meeting at CWA on the 14th from 5 to 8 p.m. Is that right?
The joint meeting.
Yes, there's a joint meeting that we are required to have both your finance committee of Portage and Marathon, and we had scheduled that hopefully for the 14th, and we have not heard back from Portage County either. So it's tentative, yes. And we would be meeting at 3 o'clock. I believe it was, Kim, for this committee, followed by the joint meeting.
If we were going to move the September meeting to
Correct.
the 14th, that's
Correct.
correct, yes.
And we still have to verify with Portage County that that was the date that they could meet. But yes, in September you will meet at with Portage County to discuss the airport budget.
The problem becomes one of recording this. If we're here, we can record it for public access. If we're there, we have a difficult time. We're not set up to record it. So we'll look at that and maybe at our next meeting finalize the date. I think that what we want to do is make sure that there's adequate time for feedback so that we can deal with it in the context of the budget. So we will either have move our meeting date or have a special meeting to do that before the September County Board meeting. Curtis, I'm looking to you for thoughts.
The county board meetings are scheduled for the 22nd and the 27th of September. So, if we had the presentation on the 27th of September, which is towards the end of the month, obviously, it could be provided at Human HR Finance and then possibly the same evening at the county board. I guess I'm looking to you, Molly, and potentially the consultants if that fits into their time schedule.
I do, now that I look at my notes and reflect back, Melina and I did talk about the 27th opposed to the 7th. That was my mistake. So, Melina, does the 27th still work for you?
Well, I just want to make sure for clarification purposes, what's going to happen, the review process is going to take some time. I need for the county to have some time, and it sounds like what everyone's talking about, and I want to just make sure that I understand, having final presentation on September 27th. The reality is that that is a very aggressive timetable. And, if we were going to be talking at the committee level, knowing that there still may be a little bit of time to make changes ahead of the county board, I would be a little bit more comfortable with that. But in essence, what that means is that all of the review process, the changes, the updates of the costing, and all the reports need to be done within about 3 weeks' time. And I'm not sure that we're going to be able to get that all done by the 27th. If we didn't have to have the final reports done, I think that is a little bit more doable, but having everything in done final form by the 27th might be a push.
Well, if as you said, that we're dealing with incremental changes to the study based upon your, if you will, preliminary findings versus your final. I think the preliminary is fine because it's within a margin of error that would be acceptable. I think so. We'll work with that in Molly, maybe between you and McGrath and county board leadership. We can get a date and a schedule, and we'll present that at the next meeting. But I want to make sure that we've got enough time for feedback. You can't take this in October at the time of a hearing and then expect meaningful discussion of the county board material to the budget, or we just won't have time. So we're caught in that conundrum. So let's make sure we build in time for county board feedback as well as incorporation into the budget and the ability to modify incrementally the preliminary report to the final report. So we'll work on that schedule and have that to you at the next meeting later this month. Anything else?
Can I ask a question, Mr. Chair? This is
Sure.
Administrator Leonard. Just of the committee, generally speaking, I know this was a lot of information today and it lacked the thing I'm sure all of you wanted, which is the cost. But quite honestly, my concern is one, building on what the chair just said. Has anybody heard anything in terms of the direction that our consultants, our professional consultants are taking in terms of building the schedule that raises concern relative to process? I mean, the number is going to be what the number is. And staff, myself, and other professionals, we will build a budget to accomplish of the and it will be balanced. I mean, I can guarantee you that. The question I have is, what I don't think would be overly valuable is if there's specific discussion at the county board level about whether position X really should be 50 cents more or less. That's what we're paying McGrath to do. I want to know whether or not there's a significant concern relative to the approach they're taking, which is the analysis of comp ratios, the idea of setting ourselves maybe in a comp ratio of 0.55 so that there's a little bit of life to the study and the schedule that we're setting up. Because as Milena said, we have not done a comprehensive revaluation of our comp schedule since 2012. And also we have funded our pay for performance system between 2 and 3% historically. And perhaps this is a good time, maybe Milena, you can, or Dr. McGrath, you can add on here. Imagine we were in a world where Marathon County funded pay for performance in that 4% level, where we were on par in 2021 with where we should be. What sort of, based on your professional experience, what sort of amount would we need to budget for compensation increases in that level, in that world? And then the one where we're actually in, where we haven't done that, does our 8% that we're putting in our forecast to build our budget, does that make sense?
Do you want McGrath to respond to that, or?
Yes, please.
Okay.
First, and we'll go back to the committee if they have any.
Sounds good. So here's what we've been seeing in the market for the past year and a half since the market has taken a wicked turn. Organizations that have been maintaining their salary schedules against the market, which means that on an annual basis, they are applying some sort of a cost of living indicator to keep those ranges competitive, and then equally making sure that the employees are getting some portion of that in their performance payment to make so that they are maintaining that competitive dollar within the range. Those organizations, and I'm working with one right now, they've done absolutely everything that they should have been doing for the past few years. And I'm telling them that they need to be putting a 4% salary adjustment across the board onto their salary ranges, and then they have to keep going. And that's an organization that's been doing what they should have been doing this whole time. Organizations that have not been maintaining their structures, including Marathon County, we are seeing anywhere from 8 to 12% is where the costs of getting everyone to realigned back into the market. And I had a conversation with an organization this morning where we were talking about that there is they have multiple salary schedules, that one of their schedules is going to have to be adjusted upwards of 14% if they want to be able to match their external market. So, it's really important, and this is going to become a policy issue. It's really important for the organization that once we get this set, and we tell you, congratulations, off you go, now go manage it, and we're going to give you some recommendations on how to manage that going forward, that those items are dealt with on an annual basis, not only with the performance management, but also making sure that you're maintaining those ranges going forward. Otherwise, it's not going to take real long, and Marathon is going to start slipping again, and you're going to be back in the same position that you're in right now, where your county administrator is going to be asking departments to, budget a pretty significant dollars, in perhaps budget years that you don't have the dollars. Victoria?
Plus, I want to echo the fact is that you're going to have a system now, and I'm glad that the county administrator brought this up, because we'll be getting input from department directors, but there's an actual methodology in which we place positions. And it's not because we think we like this person or we like that one, or this position shouldn't be higher than the others. So if you start tinkering with different positions, it's going to cause a whole domino effect of changes that are going to have to occur. And I can tell you there's a county nearby that we've given them all the rules, we've told them what they need to do, and they've started tinkering, and now they're paying us more money to fix the problems that have resulted from the tinkering of what they're doing. So, this is a large compensation structure that has criteria that is used to place positions, used to place people. And, you have to follow those guidelines and that structure in order to keep it competitive. Otherwise, you're going to be spending a lot of money on us which I don't mind, but I don't think the county should be spending it, on trying to fix things that are going outside of how the structure was built. The other thing, too, is we have been not knowing what this economy is doing, basically saying it's going to cost you this much to implement the schedule. You may look at trying to budget another bucket of money for mid-year of 2023 to see if you're going to need it in order to keep those wages competitive. Because obviously you're not being able to keep up with 8 and 9% CPIs. I mean, that's just not fiscally feasible. But we don't know what the economy is going to do going into 2023. So having another 3 or 4% available in July, if you need it, because, you know, we're still having problems with labor shortages, we're still having high inflation rates, it may be something to consider as well in your budget process.
Rosa Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of Lance's question, I think that last statement pretty much answered what I was going to ask. The tinkering component. You know, internally, we've been talking about a few departments and a few positions specifically that are seeing more turnover than others. So I think that could probably likely be a question that comes up in committee discussion and full board discussion. You know, if we're really seeing problems in these areas, why are we looking at every single position? So I think that's something we have to be prepared to really be able to answer and to address.
Chair Gibbs.
Thank you, and I apologize. I was scrambling to find a mic. With the comparable organizations and the 8, I think it is up to 8 of those comparables that are currently also doing pay studies, is that going to skew? Are we going to, you know, since we're one of 9 then that are actually doing a pay study, and if they make similar adjustments as we're talking about, anywhere from 8 to 12%, does that mean we're going to be behind the 8 ball come next year at this time? Or is that mid-year potential adjustment what you're talking about trying to accomplish in keeping our pay scale accurately?
Well, the good thing is that some of those are being done by us. So we'll have that information. We're not doing all of them, but we are doing a fair number of them. So we will have that information. So your answer is twofold. Yes, we are going to try to take that into account because we are going to know at least what our recommendations are going to be for those organizations. And that mid-year bump may also be another way in case somebody does something crazy that we're not aware of to kind of adjust the market as well.
If I can add one thing, Mr. Chair, to that, and I go back to the comment that was made earlier, and I think Molly responded to it. You know, we want to remove one pain point for the county of why we're experiencing some of the turnover that you've seen presentations on previously. There are a lot of other things that I think it was Supervisor Lemmer asked a question about. Essentially, what other levers can we pull? And you're going to have those conversations at your committee. We hope we're part of those to talk about what are some other innovative things in terms of board level policy changes that we could implement that would be the really to on the other side of the coin of compensation is employee flexibility. And what are the policy decisions the board might be willing to take on? I can tell you as an organization, we're about ready to hold a management discussion coming up here in September about all of those things, about what are our experiences with hybrid work, workforce flexibility, workforce needs, to make sure that we're doing as many things as we can as an organization and from the administration and operations side to remove the reasons that sometimes cause people to leave an organization or leave the county.
Are there any other questions? If not, we look forward to a continued dialogue, and we'll work on the timing of that and report that at the next meeting. So thank you very much for joining us today in the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good luck.
Now, without objection, I'd like to go to item 6B3, amend the KIP and transfer from contingency for the Dancy Tower. Anybody object? If not, Bill, if you want to come join us up front. And Jamie will call on you next. So. Is it? You gotta hit. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank the committee for allowing me to come to present today. What I want to talk to you guys about is one of our radio infrastructure towers for our emergency radio system in Marathon County. I'm going to give you a little backstory, and I'll show you this map here that I put up just so we have an orientation of where this is located in Marathon County when we say the Dancy Tower. You can kind of see, I'll move the cursor, Mosney, obviously here. Where the yellow pin is, that is where the new Dancy Tower is, or the Bug Tussle Tower, and the red pin is where we currently have a tower. That's the tower that we're going to be talking about today. That's County Highway C in the southern part of Marathon County, and then all of this is the Meade Wildlife Area. So from the tower over where it says 97, from there all the way to Mosney, that's 20.2 miles to span that. There's a void in that area. If the Dancy Tower is not active, there's a void of about 160 square miles of police, law, and fire radio coverage. So I wanted to show you that, and then just real quick, I'm going to give you a little bit of history as to how we got here today. Back roughly 2018, 2019, before Administrator Carger left, he and I had discovered in some annual inspections of that tower site. That's a tower site that we are in an agreement with the DNR. The DNR own that site. It's on their property. And we have an agreement, a lease, if you will, that we are on their tower for exchange for us providing the electricity we pay for, we provide the generator and the propane and the shelter that houses all the electrical equipment. We found through our annual inspections that that tower site was degraded and was on the verge of not passing its structural integrity test. That's problematic in the fact that if it doesn't and we can't get people to climb the tower, then we can't service our equipment. Those conversations led us into a number of meetings and going down the path of partnering with the DNR to build a new tower site at that location. That was, at that time, it was roughly about $1 million to do that, and it was about 1.5 years to 2 years to actually accomplish that. We got into kind of a conundrum where the DNR didn't want to provide Marathon County with any vested ownership in that site. And the contract was going to remain how it is now, which says either party can terminate the contract and vacate at 90-day notice. That was a pretty bad business venture for Marathon County, so we no longer did we move forward with that endeavor. The discussions at that time were that the DNR were going to spend roughly $50,000 to improve that site. That's where those conversations were left. And since that time, nothing has been done by the DNR. And about 2 weeks ago, I received a phone call that it was time for that tower to be inspected by their inspectors, and it has failed its structural integrity test. So that means it's deemed unsafe. And at that time, the climbers that were inspecting that tower, it's a 260-foot tower, they went up about 80 feet, and that's all the further they would go. All of our radio equipment on that tower is at or above 200 or at or above 80 feet. So problematic to us that we can't service that. That tower site is vital to our emergency communication system. It's one of 17 towers that we have, and it houses right now communication for multiple law channels, law enforcement channels, our fire and ambulance channel, and then it also services the Big Old Plain County Park for point-to-point Wi-Fi to operate communications at the Big Old Plain Park. If you see where this yellow pin map is, directly across the Big Old Plain, right about where my cursor is here, that is the campground, the Big Old Plain Park. So many of you are aware that this was on my plan and has been on the plan, the strategic plan under the new radio service agreement to look to update this site and move to a different location. That contract it was set to expire and be rewritten on the January 1 of 25. So this isn't like it was not on the roadmap to look to do something, but obviously this has come about on short order, and it is a vital site. If we lose that communication, I'm very nervous about that whole southern part of Marathon County. What I want to kind of show you now is there's a section on the plan that right now that tower site is not capable of transmitting for page coverage for our fire and EMS. You guys are well aware of, the committees have heard numerous times here at the county about our coverage for paging and alerting our fire and EMS services. I think at this point it would be a great opportunity. This was always my plan, was to add paging to the site when we built one. That's an additional $53,000 right now. That is included in the total that you see before you in your packet. I added it on there. We entered into an agreement, the county did, with Bug Tussle. You're probably very familiar with that. Part of that, when we built it, Jerry Klein from CCIT and myself met with Bug Tussle quite a few times and outlined the paths throughout the county and where we would like to see towers based on the county's need. And lo and behold, on the Monday, I found out about the bad news, and on Tuesday, we reached out to Bug Tussle. Chair Robinson put me in contact because he thought maybe a tower was going up sooner than what we thought, and lo and behold, 0.9 miles from where we currently exist, they've already broke ground for their tower, and that is one of the towers that we had in our agreement that we could put equipment on. So we quickly spun up a conversation with Bug Tussle and came to the agreement. Corp Counsel is working as I speak, back and forth with their legal to get an agreement, a contract, if you will. But it definitely looks like we're on the right path. I want to show you this map here just to kind of illustrate my paging argument as to why I think we should add paging, add that additional $53,000 at this time. If you kind of see in that same area, that big white section where I'm kind of circling with my cursor, that's roughly, that is probably about 130 square miles right there. That is for paging. Right now, that is a very, very spotty area in the county where we have poor pager coverage, to be honest with you. Towns of Bergen, Green Valley, southern part of Emmett, Day, even up into parts of Cleveland. This is the proposed. Right here is where the Dancy Tower, the new tower, would be. I'll flip back and forth, and I think you have it in your packet as well, but you can see it fills in. The gray is good. It fills in all the way up past 153 and Highway 107. I'll just go back to the other just so you can show comparison here. So I think just in the illustration, that is based on indoor coverage with a pager at an 8 dB rate, which is very conservative. So outdoors, when we did our outdoor study, all of the white over in Ashley, Knowlton, all the way up past Mosinee and Pepin, it covered all of that on outdoor coverage. So where that takes us today is obviously the cost. I bring this up just to show you where we would be if we didn't have bug tussle. If we didn't have bug tussle putting a tower up right now, we would be in the neighborhood of $1.2 to $1.3 million to build a new tower. And probably about 1.5 to 2 years out with all of the studies in the soil and everything else that has to be done. I don't know that anybody here wants to take that gamble for that long of a time on a system that we don't know how long it's going to hold up for. I will tell you that the site in Dancy has been hit by lightning and had to be repaired immediately, so these sites are vulnerable. But I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know how long it's going to last, but I don't want to be up here answering as to why I don't have something in the works. The top part of this spreadsheet just shows you the cost. We just did a move of a tower about 2 years ago, and we contacted our providers who helped us with that, and those were our costs there listed in the notes that Bug Tussle is willing to accept those costs. This isn't, they're just really nice to us. We're offering them something as well. The agreement is that we provide the structure, the building, and the generator, and the propane, allow them to put some of their rack equipment inside our building, and in exchange for that, they're going to pour the footings for the what we need down there, the concrete, the ice bridge for our cables, the slabs. They're going to take care of all the electrical work. They're going to take care of the crane, actually setting the building, all that for us. Those were some pretty hefty costs previously when we did that. It was brought to my attention that my illustration is a little bit misleading when you look at the $62,400 there. It should have said annual rent instead of monthly rent. So the monthly rent right now that we pay to be on a tower is about $5,200 down in North Marshfield Tower. So if we went on another vendor like American Tower Corporation or something like that, we could expect to pay somewhere in that neighborhood of anywhere from $5,000 to $8,000 a month. And I know that's just rent money, that's just lease money. Here we would not have any of that. Bug Tussle is not going to charge us any monthly rent either, and they're going to cover the electric bill at the site as well. Some of the other things I just want to point out that could affect what you see here on the spreadsheet is under the shelter or building. We are looking at a used one that is in good shape. I believe that amount is going to come in even less than the $35,000. That $35,000 is half the price of a brand new one. But we found a couple of them, but they go pretty quick in that $20,000 to $25,000 range. So we're hopeful we can save some money there. And then there is contingency built into this. At the very bottom, there's a 15% contingency built in just for the fact that some things don't always go as we planned. The other thing I do want to point out is the budget does reflect the point-to-point Wi-Fi for the county park. I got $10,000 budgeted that. It's doesn't matter here nor there. Jerry Klein, I just told him I'd put it in my budget. Otherwise, CCIT would have to have it in their budget. To keep it simple for everybody, we just put it in our budget. But that would definitely, with the equipment we're looking there, would definitely enhance the coverage than what we have today at the county park. With that, I believe Christy was so gracious to draft up a resolution with all the dollar amounts in there for us. So that's there. The purpose, obviously, I think you guys are well aware, is it's an action item for this committee. But I'm willing to take any questions you have.
So the issue came before Public Safety yesterday, and they recommended advancing the project to us. So it's before us today. Chair Gibbs.
Just one question as far as the equipment that's currently on the other tower, the backup of generators, and are those going to be utilized and moved, or obviously there's a timing issue. I mean, if they moved off of one, they're not available until the other one's operational. So are we going to have what's the plan on that?
Chair Gibbs, that's a great question. I'm remiss that I forgot that. Yes, that equipment right now, some of that equipment is end of life that is actually on the tower, but at the base stations, we have those operating at some of the other sites in Marathon County, so we would utilize those as backups, spares. We use them quite regularly, pulling out spares and swapping them out. We got quite a supply of that, so it would not go unused. The generator, the idea behind the generator is one of two. I do need a new generator in the near future at the Stratford site, so we'll either reuse the generator there, or I'm going to leave it there if the DNR is willing to pay us for it, and then I'll buy another one for Stratford. But it's just easier. We don't have to unhook it and pay the electrical and all that for having an electrician come out. But the equipment, the only equipment I can't tell you that we will reuse in some fashion is if that tower actually physically has to be cut down, probably our equipment that's on the tower wouldn't be usable.
Are there any questions? And again, let me, from the perspective of context, the agreement that we entered into with Bug Tussle last fall had a provision that allowed us 6 feet on each of the towers. So it was, thinking ahead, and we also had 24 strands of fiber in that, and that's what Mike is working on the agreement with Mitch Olson and other representatives from Bug Tussle, so that we provided the loan to Bug Tussle for $25 million to do the 16 towers and the 370 miles of fiber, and this is one of the benefits that we accrued as a result of that agreement. So it's a win-win for us, and particularly in this case. Any other questions? Gail.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I realize that this came up quite suddenly, so were we able to competitively bid the request for this equipment, or is this our go-to supplier?
This is a current supplier that we have. We have a contract. We're under Raycom contract until till January 1 of 2025. So they are our radio service provider. So we would go direct with the company we already have the contract with.
Other questions? So the issue before us is advancing this to the county board. I think the funding, as proposed in the initial resolution, calls for it to come out of the contingency fund, and I think we have $800,000 in there. I know that I had a discussion with Chair Gibbs on whether or not we should evaluate other sources. Chair Gibbs, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. And so the question that my suggestion is that we use possibly the ARPA funding and preserve the contingency fund, even if we use this under ARPA and lost revenue, if it doesn't fit into a specific category, although it may fit into a specific category. My recommendation would be that we look at ARPA first rather than contingency. As far as board approval, it's the same. It would require a 2/3 majority either way, out of contingency or out of ARPA.
With that, any questions or motions? Chair Gibbs.
I'll make a motion that we approve and forward to the full board the funding request, the capital project funding request for the tower and equipment, and the funding source be the ARPA funding.
Is there a second? Seconded by Lemmer. Any discussion? Supervisor Leahy.
I guess my only question is that this didn't go through the process for using ARPA funding. We didn't talk about it as a committee like we did those other requests. And we did throw a lot of the internal ARPA requests to the CIP process. So I don't know if I agree with that. Thanks.
Just looking at the expenditure categories, I would get a little bit more information from the Sheriff's Department, but it would qualify under 3 different categories. Tourism, infrastructure for it's 1.7, I can't remember the naming, or revenue loss.
And Supervisor Leahy's correct in that we have a process we haven't followed, but we also didn't anticipate the inspection report. The advantage of ARPA or another funding source versus contingency is the contingency fund, anything that's unspent goes into our fund balance, which is available for future capital projects. I'm reluctant to violate our process, but there's also, I think we're going to need to keep money in that contingency fund for the future projects.
Just one comment on that contingency. ARPA does have qualifications, so I can see 1.7, 2 point, I think it's 12 and 6.1. But contingency can be used for any basic emergency in the county, so it's kind of a strange year, and there could be other things that we would need it for, but that may not meet those same requirements at ARPA. And I'm talking from experience because we'll have a snowstorm, a huge jury trial, a DA who needs expert witnesses or testimony. So just from living through a year, especially this is a little bit crazy, I'm anticipating there may be other weird things that happen before the end of the year. Weird things is a financial term too.
Professional financial term.
Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I was wondering, so the contingency fund is full right now, and you did go over the examples of what we would be using, what in the past we used them for. How much longer do we have in the fiscal year for any of those other potential things to happen?
Yeah, there's a $800,000 contingency fund that needs to be approved by resolution through the county board. There's an additional $50,000 contingency fund that's incorporated into the budget resolution, and that can be spent by this committee. So it needs to come to you, and that $50,000 can be spent by approval of this committee. So on the $800,000 one, we have a proposal to take this project at $371,860. You will also see another one on coming up next for $74,400. That leaves you with the remaining amount of $353,740 plus your 50. So it's about half or a little less than half would be available if you would take these two resolutions in a row for contingency.
But the answer to the question is the contingency, this funds contingency through the remainder of this calendar year through December 31st. So, and normally, historically, the requests for contingency come at the tail end of the year because that's when departments start to run out of funding. So we normally don't see them at this early in the year, but this.
Any other questions?
Just one other comment. I do understand that we haven't gone through the process on that we use for all the other ARPA funds. But again, I think this is an emergency, and I think there's not a question of whether we clearly need to have emergency dispatch and communications, and without any other alternative, we could have been looking at a 1.3 million cost or more, and a delay of up to 2 years to get it built. And so I think it's clearly needed, and like I said, I think it's prudent on us and imperative on us that we support moving the communication system forward.
Supervisor Hart.
And then conversely, I wanted to know how much we would have left for all of the allocation of ARPA funding, because I know we made a few allocations, and I haven't seen an update on where we stand with that right now.
Do you have an accounting, Christy? And we will, on that note, we will be taking 3 proposals to the county board this month relative to the ARPA funds relative to the highways and North Central Healthcare, and there's a third one that we had agreed to at our meeting last month.
Regional Forensic Science Center.
So far, you have the PTO liability reduction, the Uniquely Wisconsin. Those 2 have been handled. Lease space within community partners, courtroom and audio enhancements, which is about a third of the way done, and then the broadband expansion of 3.9. So you have a little over about $4.5 million that have been allocated or obligated through your process.
Plus the 3 projects.
Yeah, but the 3 projects, I think, at this point haven't been approved by the full board. They've been approved by this committee, the infrastructure funding, the Forensic Science Center allocation of $2 million. Again, that was contingency. And then, like I said, the infrastructure was also contingency, contingent on the other receiving those other funding to fully support those projects. But those haven't been approved by the full board yet. So to answer, I guess, Supervisor Hart's question, we've allocated and or spent up to $4.5 million of the 26.
Go ahead, Supervisor Hart.
And then with my rough calculation for the 3 items that we are going to bring to the board, I think I remember that was about 15 collectively. So then we would sit at about 20 million spent if everything goes through. So that would mean that we'd have about 6 million left in ARPA funds. I just wanted to make sure that was correct.
Approximately, yes.
Rough numbers, real rough numbers.
And I think one of the things we need to do with ARPA is that we have to be on top of those commitments and those expenditures, because if we don't spend it, we lose it. So we should be going back in, and I think we need to review the PTO buyout, and we ought to lower that, because I think we budgeted $500,000 and I think it was actually 150 some thousand.
Yep, that one's already been handled and reported to the U.S. Treasury. So it was budgeted at $500,000, and we've used just under 160,000, and that one's been completed and reported.
So we'll have to continually be aware of where we are. We've got, again, those contingencies for the forensic lab. And if they haven't moved by end of next year, we're going to have to reallocate those dollars, because we have to encumber them by the end of 2024. So we'll be constantly reviewing those projects at a staff and committee level. Other questions? If not, all those in favor? Any question? All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Thank you, and we will forward that to the county board. Next, we'll call on Jamie Polly for the Marathon County Water Service Design. There's additional information that was put in the packet today. So Jamie, are you on?
Thank you, Mr. Yes, can you hear me, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for moving this up. I am not in the area today. So fast forward, I put in your packet an agenda summary of what we're asking. This is for the water system at Marathon Park that we know the water system's old. We've had this something in the recent years that we've been looking at, trying to map it and trying to figure out where all the water pipes are. I do have, we had knowledge of, our water system being there, but we do have it tested every year, because as you know, in Marathon Park, we do have a campground, and by the campground state statutes, it has to have potable water within so many feet for the campers. So that's a contingency we have every year. So we know the water has been safe. However, this last year, the PFAS items of the city that the city is dealing with, they are cracking down more on different systems and whether or not they allow systems to be turned on, even if they are tested. And we were given notice in Marathon Park that because our water system currently our water system in Marathon Park is not looped through the park. There's a main that goes into the park, and then it dead ends somewhere in the middle of the midway, and then it branches out from there. So this is really the west half of the park. And what we have to do each year is we have to winterize it, but the winterization is all underground. So by current code, all of the endings of those pipes need to be above ground with boxes and certain things so that it can be monitored and blown out even in a better fashion. So we have been told that we probably would not have our water turn on next year if we do not start to address this issue. So what we're bringing forward today is a proposal that we received. We went out for a request for proposals. We received one company respond. We did get one other company let us know that they were interested, but their workload was too high at the moment. So Becker Hoppy has given us a proposal. This would map the entire system within the park and then put together a plan to bring the west half of the park to compliant. So this is the design work. The reason why we're bringing it forward now is because we would like to get it designed this year and then we have another request that just went to CIP for the actual construction of the system, that if we can get it designed this year, we can bid it January, February of next year, have it ready to go for construction as soon as the ground thaws, in the really positive hope that we can have water back up and running for the fair next year is our goal. So not having water for the fair is a major issue, let alone we won't be able to have the campground open or any of the restrooms open while we're doing this project because there will be no water. So this is the design work to get it ready to be able to bid out and construct it next year. If the construction is approved, we have found $21,000 in our current budget. So we're asking for $74,400 from the Contingency Fund to do this design work. And then, as I mentioned, you have a CIP request that right now has a range. The work could be anywhere from $600,000 to $1.2 million, depending upon how we loop it. But that is something that we will find out the exact number before budget time if we can move this forward. That's
So
what
I have a question for you, Jamie, as it relates to the master plan, and how will these efforts be coordinated or impacted by the development of the master plan for the park?
Sure. In talking with our consultants and looking at our master plan, this really is the water system of the park, and our master plan doesn't hinder it at all. One thing that we will do is we'll look at what we're looking at for our master plan of where we might move vendors and water outlets, and that might give us a better idea of what we can put into the design to be ready for those changes. But the main water line going through would not be affected by the master plan and would be the major infrastructure of the park that we would work with.
Are there other questions for Jamie? Gail, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we approve going forward with the plan, but then if we don't approve the construction, we've just wasted the money of the plan. So I think we should take into account that if you have an objection to spending $1 million on the implementation of the design, then we shouldn't approve the design money. Otherwise, it's going to be a sunk cost. So just put that into perspective.
It's a valid point. Doesn't make sense to have a plan on the shelf. But I think we've been finding out at North Central Healthcare and others that the city is looking to upgrade facilities and meters and making sure that the possibility for cross-contamination is minimized. I think that's consistent with DNR guidelines. And I think that's what's staring us in the face in this situation. So I think that there's a need for us to act, and we're again playing catch up on something that we should have been looking at on a long-term basis. Hopefully we'll, as a result of changing our capital improvement process, be avoiding these situations in the future. Chair Gibbs.
Just a question to Jamie, maybe a little bit. Jamie, if the county board chose not to fund either the study or the actual improvements, would not all of the facilities in the park be affected? Meaning not only the restroom facilities and the campground facilities, but would not also the other facilities, such as the ice arenas and that type of thing, also be affected?
At this time, in talking with our consultants and knowing where the water system is, the ice arena and Eastgate Hall would not be affected because they are year-round facilities. So we don't ever winterize those facilities.
Okay.
It would basically be anything from the junction west.
Gotcha. All right, thank you.
All right, what are your wishes?
If I may, Chair Robinson,
Go ahead.
if I may add one thing. So the plan to itself, and to speak with the plan versus the actual construction of it, if we have a plan ready to go, I don't see it as a wasted cost, because either way, we do have to upgrade this water system at some point, whether it's next year or the year after. The plan for it isn't going to change. It just gives opportunity to pull the trigger and bid it out for construction as soon as we are ready. So if the county board chooses not to fund this in 2023, that may mean, we don't have the camping facilities, we don't have water on the west end, which we'll have to talk about at that time. But if maybe 2024 is a better year, then we have the plans ready to go, we can bid it right away. So having a plan ready for construction and bid isn't necessarily a bad thing. In my opinion, it saves some time to go through with the project.
All right, any other questions or motions? Supervisor Hart.
I just have a question on if the county board weren't to approve, not the plan, but the reconstruction of it. Does mean then that we wouldn't have water in the park west of the splash pad? Is that what we would be facing then? I just wanted to confirm that.
The Marathon Junction building, so yes.
Yeah, so that would include the splash pad. That is what we're being told by the Wausau Waterworks at this time, is if we do not get our system to code, that they could not turn the water on to the west half of the park. Which means, yes, then we would not have camping, we would not have a splash pad, and the restrooms there would not be available, because we cannot have camping per state statute without that water requirement.
Gail.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what's before us is, can we wait 5 months to include it in next year's budget, or is this enough of an emergency to use as a contingency fund? So the project might have merit, but it's a matter of, can you wait 5 months and put it in next year's budget?
Well, the problem that we find why we're bringing it forward now, as I explained, is the timing. It takes 6 to 8 weeks to do this design work. If we wait till next year, 6 to 8 weeks puts us into the March doing design. We bid it out April, May. We have the fair to contend with. So that puts the construction of it, and depending upon which plan we choose, there'll be a number of plans we can choose based on whether we want to loop the water system or not. That will come forward with the design. That's what we're up against, is being able to have water for the fair. So by trying to get the design work done this year, to be able to then discuss the project, if the project gets approved, we bid it out right away, January, February. We have more time to make sure that we have water for the fair.
The transfer of funds will require a 2/3 vote versus a capital improvement process will only require a majority vote. So there's a high standard relative to the ability to do the work this year. So we're looking at a 2/3 vote of the county board to approve the project this year, and a simple majority to include it in the capital plan for next year. So there's your safeguard for the county board. Chair Gibbs?
Yeah, I guess the same thing is here, since we do see this potentially as similar to, maybe not to the extent as a safety issue, but I think that utilizing ARPA here also potentially would be my recommendation also. It is a water system. It is clearly identifiable as one of the project areas under ARPA that it would qualify for, even though it's design of a water system. And so I don't, my motion would be to approve the request for additional funding to pay for the design work, and the funding source be ARPA.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Leahy with her head shaking. No. Any discussion? Supervisor Limmer.
I'm guessing, or thank you, Mr. Chair, I'm guessing this can't be answered, but it probably should be prepared for when we do go to full board. I'd love to know what the economic impact is of the fair, to know what would happen, say we don't have water, and now would the fair get postponed? Would the fair get shrunk? You know, what would happen if this didn't go forward?
Supervisor Hart and then Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess in the same regard, you know, the Parks Department is one of our departments that is revenue. So even having the information ready that if any part of the summer we don't have water there, what are we losing in those camping fees, et cetera? Thank you.
All right. We will work with Parks Administration to have those answers when the presentation goes to the county board. Any other questions? If not, all those in favor of adoption of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We will now go back up to
Thank you.
approval of the budget assumptions. Christie, long time to get through that.
Item 1.
Item 5A.
So I was having a heart attack when the Mercer people said they weren't going to get you numbers till the end of September. But we've got a plan, and we're going to get through this. So what I have is the budget assumptions that they kind of talked about at the end as where they're going to be sitting at so that we can move forward and get you a 2023 budget together. And they had been taking a look at the comparables and saying an 8 to 12%. And so what we did put in there for our budget assumption is 8% based on the very preliminary figures that we have from our consultants doing the pay study. And I think that will be appropriate for us to move through this. Our budget software is a very old system, and it likes to do things in a certain way. And I think we'll be able to get this done with the information and coordinating with our consultants and coordinating with our departments to get our budgets to you in October. With that, let's use the mouse to get to the right spot. Okay, so weird things happen, and this one is one of those that's going to be really strange in the amount of time I've been doing budgets, and we'll get to that in a little bit. What we're doing is a 5-year financial projection, and we're going to try to get to a balanced budget in October for a presentation from the county administration to the finance committee. And these are the numbers that we're starting with. Now, remember, we said August 15th is a big day for us because that's when the final Department of Revenue numbers come out. We do have preliminary numbers, and I was shocked. I'm usually really close on those, and I am way off on equalized value, but not so much on net new construction, which is one of those weird things that we were talking about before, because we really have had a dramatic increase in the equalized value for county apportionment, but not in net new construction, which is odd. They're usually parallel at about a 1 to 2 or 1 to 3. So there'd be a 1% change and maybe up to a 3% change on the equalized value, and that is not the case. It's more of a 1 to 10 ratio this year. So that's one of those things that I've not seen before. But anyway, based on the assumptions we're going to talk about today, we're going to try to come in at a balanced budget. And like I said, these tax levies and the tax rates are all estimates based on preliminary numbers from our Department of Revenue, and I do not and will not have final numbers until August 15th. And you may say, well, there's probably nothing that's really going to change. Municipalities can appeal the values, and also if a TID completely closes, the residual portion of the TID value does come back to us, and that could affect and increase our net new construction component or the amount of taxes that we are able to levy at the county level. So those are some things that we still wait for, and they do happen and do make final changes. With that, just kind of going over how we kind of got to these numbers by revenue by category, looking at what the property taxes would do based on the estimates. And then one of the things that we do have in here is increases in some of our other areas. And we are also assuming, and this one I've specially highlighted, that the portion, we had some questions on the North Central Healthcare debt, and so that would be the amount that would be attributable to the North Central Healthcare annual debt service amounts. And in order to, this is where we can change those assumptions. So on this case, we have a assumption that property taxes are going to go up. The net new construction that we received from the Department of Revenue is 1.73%. Property taxes also include bridge aid, library tax, and debt service as well. So based on that, they would go up higher than a net new construction, particularly for debt service. And that then leads us to this information. One of the things that you do see on here is that we will be increasing our intergovernmental grant, because we will be using some of those ARPA funds in the 2023 budget, and we had talked about that. Right now, you're looking at adding some ARPA to things that are coming up in an already established budget. But what we're looking at prospectively is trying to put that ARPA funding in the budget as it goes through the budget process. So you have those projects that you have, but where they are appropriate, we would be putting them in the budget so that it's a part of that. So then we have our expenditures, and we break those out by personnel costs, operating debt, capital, and then other intergovernmental charges. And here's what we're looking at based on the information that we heard today from our consultants, and also what we are looking at for some of our other personnel costs and for debt, operating, capital, and intergovernmental charges. Three of the things that I want to bring up is that we did add the 8% in wages. Again, we had talked about health insurance. Our current provider said that the cost increase would be 8.5%. That is in our contract, so they have not come back with a different number. We are hoping to come back at 0% for health insurance. So one of those things has got to give between all the percentage that we have. WRS is established by the state of Wisconsin, and then the rest of them that we're looking at are allocating just small increases, and those are basically kind of amounts that are generally not changing too much. In regards to debt service, we do have higher debt service payments that will be in 2023 and on. And we are also, one of the other items that we are seeing is from the preliminary data center CCITC report. Their operating costs are going up, and that is for the cost of subscription for Microsoft Teams and other licenses, and also the cost of software as a service, or OSRS costs that we did not have in the past where it could have been on site. So those are things that we're monitoring on that side, but these are the expenditure assumptions that we will be initiating in our budget process starting, well, actually we started in July, so we are on our way, and this is what we'll be putting in for the 2023 at this time. So again, these are the preliminary numbers, but this is what the oddest thing is about the budget process so far for me, is that if you take a look, net new construction, and I do an 6 to 8 year average. Net new construction on an 8-year average, if you take a look here, is 1.667. And this year's preliminary numbers are coming in at 1.73. So it's looking pretty close. I put a 1.35 to guess before that. If you look at equalized value for the county apportionment, which is the equalized value for all items and base value on TIDS, because the increment's going to the municipality, that increase over an 8-year average is 3.44%. But if you take a look at for the preliminary numbers, again, they are not final. That increase is almost over 11%. So if you see in other years, such as 2022, net new construction is 2%, increase in equalized value is 2.47. So the increase in the dollars that we're going to levy and the increase in the rate are pretty proportionate, so it will go down a little bit, but it's really been established in a pretty smooth pattern of increase in the rate, fluctuates a small amount. But given the fact that this is such a large discrepancy, and remember that the top numbers new construction and the bottom is equalized value, that it really is a function of math that it will drop the rate by a much larger factor than it has in the past. So to me, that's just really, I didn't do a lot of analyzing on which, whether it's retail, commercial, and that type of thing, but that we have not seen in that much of a disproportionate increase in one, not the other. And so that's really what I wanted to also highlight today, which I was odd, and we can take a little bit. That's why I'm just waiting until get those final numbers. It just seems like that's a considerable increase for one side and not the other. And with that, that's really what I had for budget assumptions. Those are the ones we were running around with. I'll get my final numbers on the 15th. We'll plug them in there and see where we're at. And one of those items I just want to highlight that I haven't done a lot of investigating in is just where those increases in equalized value are. And as from a standpoint, Department of Revenue has that information out. And also, even though the increase is a little lower than it was last year, some of our municipalities are under 1%. And maybe about a dozen are over 2% or more. And so it's not really have a pattern that has in the past either. But remember, net new construction is what you build that goes up minus what you tear down. And I do have one small Village of Unity that actually has a negative net new construction, and I've never seen that either. So that, if you have any questions, I'll answer them. Otherwise, that's really where we're at as far as the budget building.
Chair Gibbs.
Christie, the total debt service that you're showing in 2023 on the one spreadsheet is $4,034,911. That does include 100% of NCHC's debt service. Is that correct?
Yep. So on the, I always put the revenue as it's intergovernmental revenue. So on the revenue side, it's the amount of money that we will be getting from North Central Healthcare as their contribution to the annual debt service payments. And on the expenditure side, it's the true amount of all debts that we owe for all projects, whether they're county or healthcare center.
Good.
Other questions? And again, this is building in that 8% for the wages and reflects the debt service. If not, Christy, thank you very much for sharing that and keeping us updated. We look forward to seeing the final numbers for equalization. All right, next we'll go on to 6A1, Village of Edgar Tax Deed Property. Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to remind the committee, this is the particular property in the Village of Edgar that is actually a portion of West Maple Street in Edgar. So the property that the county owns is a street. The committee asked me to do some research on this issue to see what our possible ways out of this issue could be. I did do some research, and that research led to more questions than answers, as it typically does with the lawyer involved. But here's what I found. It's interesting if you look at the the map and where this parcel sits, it's very clear that this was once joined to a larger parcel. At some point, it was partitioned off. My assumption is that when that happened, it was partitioned off to become part of this road, but there was never a document recorded that memorialized that occurring. So this remained a property on the tax roll. No one was paying taxes on it, and it then became our property. As far as solutions moving forward, the first potential solution, which I think is not really a solution at all, is we could consider taking action to rescind our tax deed on this particular parcel. I think that sets a very bad precedent, number one. But number two, we also lose control over what happens to the property. It doesn't resolve the issue of this piece of road not being owned by a municipality, and it doesn't really address the outstanding taxes. The other, I think, potential way forward, which is, I think, more palatable, is typically when we're dealing with tax deed property, the state statutes as well as our county ordinances require us to go out get bids on the properties and sell to the highest bidder. There's an exception, though, in the statute as well as in our ordinance for if we decide to sell to a municipality. I think probably the best and most appropriate action that I would recommend is to seek from the Village of Edgar, to seek from them whether they're interested in engaging in a transaction with us. I think having them initiate that contact and then authorizing county staff to perform that and complete that transaction would be appropriate. The question for me still remains, what's the transaction look like? What is the sale price of a piece of road? Our ordinance indicates that when we're selling tax deed property to a municipality, we're supposed to sell at the lesser of the assessed value of the property or the outstanding special assessments, fees, and other charges. There is no assessed value because there was never an assessment done on this piece of property, so that's a little bit difficult. It also would, in my opinion, perhaps be a waste of money to assess the value of a piece of road. I think it's hard to put a value on that, but certainly there is some value. So I'm just throwing that all out there to say that the likely solution here is to engage with the Village of Edgar, and you're certainly empowered to direct staff to do that. As far as the parameters of how we engage with the village and what you want to see out of that sale, that's the question, I guess, that I would need answered.
So Michael and I had a discussion earlier today, and I think Chapter 75 gives us that out and having the village make the request for the property. And I think our goal, given the fact that we've paid them for property that they owned by buying the tax roll, we would want to recover as much of that as possible. But I would open it up for questions or comments. Kurt?
I guess that was going to be my suggestion is, at a bare minimum is whatever we have settled with the Village of Marathon or Village of Edgar here, because when back taxes are owed, the county still is responsible for paying the municipality their proportionate share, which would include also the Edgar School District and the North Central Technical College. However, I would say, or my suggestion would be, and once we took it by tax deed, then there's no more settlement. But prior to that, all of the back taxes were settled with the municipality and the school districts and the tech. My suggestion would be that The settlement would be a sale to the village for, at minimum, the amount of settlement that we provided to the municipality.
I think we're looking for a flavor of the committee because we don't have a formal request before us today. Does anybody, from a consensus perspective, have a problem with that approach? I'm seeing everybody nodding. They don't have a problem. So, Mike, would it be appropriate for the committee to direct you to work with the village relative to Chapter 75 transfer, requesting that they make the request to the county, or should we just rely on you to make that phone call?
I can take the consensus of the committee as a direction to me to engage in those discussions with the eventual request coming from the village.
All right. So we don't need a motion today. Any questions? All right. If not, we'll move on to approval of July claims and question costs, which were sent to you last week, I believe. Any questions or motions? Supervisor Leahy moves to approve. Is there a second? Seconded by Gail, by Marshall. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Intergovernmental budget transfers. Christy, they're in the packet. You want to quick give us a highlight? There is a sheriff's department and medical examiner. Mike is not on.
It's dead, probably.
All right, so we have two that will, the sheriff has two grants, and they are, one is new. It's a tactical medical training grant for the SWAT team, so they're going to learn medical things for that group. And that's a grant that we received from the federal government. The other one is the same grant, just the next iteration of that for, it's a SCAP grant, and it's for housing inmates in the jail. And there is one more for this committee, medical examiner, and she gets an overdose grant, and we just put it in the wrong sub-fund, so it moved from 207 to 206.
All right, so we have new grants and old grants and transfers. Some of it, the new grants will go to the county board, the old grants will not. So are there any questions? Supervisor Hart.
I just had a question on the medical examiner. So it was just to make a correction to something. Okay, because I was going to ask why there wasn't an explanation on it, and that works.
All right, any questions? If not, a motion is in order. Moved by Supervisor Hart to approve the intergovernmental transfers. Is there a second? Seconded by Lemmer. Any discussion? If not, all's in favor will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Update from Administrator on budget preparation process, and this is a standard that he's doing with all committees. So Lance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize if you've heard this spiel before, but it actually, the genesis of it was based on a conversation we had at your last meeting, and it was in response to a question, I believe, from Supervisor Lemmer that prompted a little bit of a discussion at the committee about how the budget's going to be developed. And I wanted to go through and I've had this conversation at each of the standing committees because I think it provides some direction to the committees on what staff are doing at the same time that the committees are undertaking some important work relative to the budget as well. So as we've talked about before, the standing committees and the full board are really the policy drivers behind what programs and services we deliver as a county within the realm allowed for by state law and administrative code. At the same time, when you look at the role of staff, and particularly as it relates to the budget, as Christy just showed you, each and every year we get a little bit of new money in terms of net new construction. And the cost that we all experience to perform that same work goes up by more than excuse me, that net new construction amount. So staff are every year working to deliver all the same services and programs that we delivered previously, unless the board tells us to stop a program, downsize a program, create a new program, or expand an existing program. We're going to try to do all the same things we did the year before with those increasing fiscal constraints. So I think it's a very valid question to ask, well, how do you do that? And we do that in a couple of ways. First, we strive to seek out opportunities for continuous process and quality improvement. We have a program that Molly heads up. It's called the Ideas Academy, and essentially the purpose behind it is to constantly be looking for areas of waste and ways to essentially do things better and more efficiently. I'll give you an example. Within the highway department, I gave this example in the infrastructure committee. We did a process improvement project with a whole bunch of sticky notes, getting everyone in a room and talking about what this process looks like. But the process was, how do we do crack filling for maintenance of county roadways? And the result of that was we essentially doubled our productivity in terms of the amount of cracks we were able to fill within a given day, and we reduced our cost significantly to do it. So there's value in that continuous process and quality improvement. So that's one strategy. A second is technology. You guys are very familiar with Workday. This committee has heard a lot about it, and a lot of the current processes we use that are staff intensive, to the extent we can identify technology solutions that are cost effective, we can redeploy those staff to continue to deploy to deliver the services we need to deliver. And then the last one I'll talk about is model changes. So we want to always be looking at the programs that we deliver as often as we can, because this takes a lot of staff time, but we look at the program and we look at, is there a way to, a different model of program delivery that may be advantageous from a quality or a cost perspective. So let me give you an example that was discussed at the Board of Health, and it relates to the nurse home visiting program. The way that Marathon County has delivered nurse home visiting for more than 20 years in Marathon County is through the Start Right model. It's been mentioned in a lot of the recent county administrator budgets that have been proposed and reviewed by this committee and then ultimately the county board, because it is a discretionary program. It's not mandated, but there's certainly a lot of people that benefit from it, and there's a desire to have some scrutiny over the return on investment. So the county board several years ago was looking for really specific data on that return on investment and specific data on outcomes. So what we did, staff did, is we engaged with the University of Wisconsin-Madison through the University Year program that we participated in. And we had a statistical examination done by essentially a data scientist through the UW, and they looked at the outcomes from that program. And the short answer is they saw significant value in terms of the program, but it was really difficult to put dollar amounts to that because of the fact that we had a lot of people that accessed the program, but we didn't have a great deal of internal data that lent itself well to a return on investment analysis. And it would take a great deal of analysis and data collection to do that, to essentially have that longitudinal data. So then, based on that information, and that analysis by University Year is on the University Year website. I encourage you to look at it. It's also in the Board of Health packet from, I believe that was this month. So you can read that. But based on that analysis, I requested the health officer evaluate whether or not there was a different model that accomplished two things, really. First, the general goals of a nurse home visiting program, but also set us up for more success relative to the board's desire for increased access to data, specifically return on investment data. And the health officer and her team, they did that. They went out and they looked at the various models for nurse home visiting programs, and they selected a different model. It's called the Nurse Family Partnership Model. It's widely used across the country. It's used in over 40 states, including the state of Wisconsin, where it's used by multiple counties. There's a lot of data with respect to that program. So again, it's going to be important for us to have fidelity to that program because, essentially, Start Right, that model, by the end, it was very homegrown. We made a lot of changes to how we operated that, so that we lost that data set that we would otherwise may have had access to. So should we maintain fidelity to the model, the Nurse Family Partnership Model, we'll have a lot of that information in terms of return on investment from all of the various counties across the country that utilize it, including those within the state of Wisconsin. But also we'll have the ability to start to build that longitudinal data set within Marathon County. And on top of that, it's also at a fiscal benefit for the county. It's going to save in our projections in 2023, it's going to save about $370,000. And then moving into 2024, we anticipate those savings being in excess of $600,000 over our current expenditures for the Start Right model. So those are the three things that staff are doing. Again, process improvement, process and quality improvement. The second being technology, and the last being seeking out model changes to try to build a budget within the fiscal limitations that we have that still continues to deliver all the same programs and services. Absent direction from the standing committees or the board that you're looking for something else. So the message I've been giving to all the committees is, please let us know if you want something else. If you want to end a program or downsize a program in terms of service level, or if you're looking to add a new program or expand an existing program, we need to know that and know what that's going to look like and know how you're going to fund it if it's going to be an increase in costs as we build the budget. So that's a bit of the traveling roadshow that has been happening to each of the other committees, and I'm happy, Chair Robinson, to answer any questions that any committee members might have.
As an aside, as we look at how we approach the next year's budget, we've had a supervisor advance the concept of trying to bring in priority-based budgeting. At this time in the county had made a commitment to priority-based budgeting a few years ago, and we hired a firm out of Colorado to work on it. But one of the things that I think we found as we got into the priority-based budgeting is that we didn't have the good data to do the evaluation. And part of that process is evaluating, is it a mandated service or an optional service? Are there other providers that can provide the service in the community? And they're desirous of having it implemented this year. I think I would just caution us, given the workload that we have with moving from Kayenta to Workday and the ERP process, I think our staff is at capacity in terms of their ability to take on new tasks this year. And quite honestly, if we don't have the financial system in place that lets us do that analysis, it's not an effective program. The old saying, garbage in, garbage out, really applies in this situation. And while there's merit to an approach to a priority-based budgeting system, I think we just have to give ourselves time and give staff the support they need to get the conversion from Kayenta to Workday and the new systems, and look to the future as trying to implement that priority-based budgeting system going forward. And meritorious in nature, but I think we don't want to burn our staff out to the point where we have a higher vacancy rate and or diminish our capability to get that system in place. So that's been out there. Are there any questions for the administrator? If not, we look forward to prolonged and interesting discussions on the budget. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, committee members are welcome to bring any ideas for the future discussion. Our next meeting will be focused on the strategic plan, the committee work plan, and a few other items. But we will get to you beforehand a draft of the summary of the work plan items and let you think about what your priorities are so we can have that discussion. I think there's a need to limit what we expect to do as a committee. I know TIF is an important issue to at least 3 or 4 members of the committee, so that will be one of those options going forward. Anything else you'd like to have us discuss going forward? And I think that we'll probably just touch on ARPA for an update perspective. Supervisor Hart, I know that you continue to be interested in where we are, and so we'll put that on there. Anything else? If not, our next meeting is the 23rd, and a motion to adjourn is in order. Moved by Gibbs, seconded by Leahy. All those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Thank you all for your participation.